The morning air was cold when David stepped off the bus. He pulled his jacket tighter and looked up at the building in front of him. The Riverside Music Hall stood like a castle, with its tall stone walls and huge wooden doors. This was it. This was the place where his life might actually change. David was 19 years old and he worked as a delivery driver. 6 days a week he carried packages upstairs, knocked on doors, and drove through traffic. But today was different. Today he wasn't wearing his brown uniform. He was wearing the only suit he owned, bought 3 years ago from a second-hand store for his cousin's wedding. He checked his watch. 8:30 in the morning. The competition started at 9. His hands were already sweating and he wiped them on his pants. In his other hand he held a brown folder. Inside were sheets of music he'd printed at the library, some with coffee stains on the edges because he'd practiced at the diner during his lunch breaks. Taking a deep breath, David walked toward the entrance. 2 people stood by the door, both wearing expensive-looking clothes. The woman had on a long black dress, and the man wore a suit that probably cost more than David made in a month. They glanced at him, then looked away quickly like he wasn't worth their attention. David pushed through the heavy doors and stepped inside. His breath caught in his throat. The lobby was massive. The ceiling stretched up so high he had to tilt his head back to see it. A huge chandelier hung in the center, throwing light across marble floors that were so shiny he could almost see his reflection. Everything smelled like old wood and money. People filled the lobby. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They stood in small groups, talking quietly. Some practiced scales under their breath, fingers moving in the air like they were touching invisible keys. Others sat on velvet benches, eyes closed, clearly visualizing their performances. Everyone looked like they belonged here. Everyone except David. He felt his stomach twist. What was he thinking? He didn't go to a fancy music school. He didn't have a teacher who trained at some famous conservatory in Europe. He learned piano by watching free videos online, by checking out books from the library, by staying up late at night pressing keys on a cheap keyboard he'd bought used for $60. A woman in a navy blazer walked past him, then stopped and turned back. She had a clipboard and a name tag that read "Competition Staff." "Excuse me," she said, not unkindly but with a hint of confusion. "Are you looking for someone? The viewing area for families won't open until later." David felt his face get hot. "No, I'm competing. I'm here for the competition." The woman's eyebrows went up slightly. Oh, I see. I'm sorry, I thought..." She didn't finish the sentence, but David knew what she thought. She thought he was lost. She thought he didn't belong here. "Registration is over there," she said, pointing to a long table on the far side of the lobby. "You'll need to check in." "Thank you," David mumbled and walked toward the table. He felt eyes on him as he crossed the room. Or maybe he was imagining it. Maybe nobody was actually looking at him at all. But he felt exposed anyway, like a spotlight was following him across that perfect marble floor. At the registration table, an older man with gray hair sat behind a computer. He smiled politely. "Name?" "David Park." The man typed on his keyboard, squinting at the screen. Park. "Ah, here we are." David Park self-registered. "You'll be in the preliminary round, Group 3. That starts at 11. He handed David a program and a number to pin to his jacket. "Number 47. Is there a place I can practice?" David asked. The man looked at a chart. "Let's see. The main rehearsal rooms are all booked. But there's a practice room in the lower level. Take the stairs down, last door on the right. It's available." David nodded and headed for the stairs. As he walked, he heard voices behind him. "Did you see that guy?" Someone whispered, not quite quietly enough. "I know. Where do they even find these people? Probably thinks he has a chance because he can play for Elise." Laughter followed, soft and cruel. David kept walking. He didn't turn around. His jaw was tight, but he kept his face forward and his steps steady. Down the stairs. Left, then right. Last door. The practice room was small and cold. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling. In the corner sat an upright piano, old and scratched with a few keys that had yellowed with age. David set his folder down on top of the piano and sat on the bench. It wobbled a little. He could hear the sounds from upstairs filtering down through the ceiling. Beautiful flowing music. Someone was playing Chopin, and they were playing it perfectly. Every note was clean, every phrase was shaped just right. That was what real training sounded like. That was what thousands of dollars in lessons could buy. David put his hands on the keys. They were cold under his fingers. He pressed down on middle C and the note came out slightly flat. The piano was out of tune. For a moment, he just sat there. He thought about his grandmother. She'd passed away 2 years ago, but he still remembered her voice. She used to hum while she cooked, old songs from Korea that she'd learned as a child. She never had much money. She worked in a dry cleaning shop for 30 years, breathing in chemicals and pressing clothes until her hands ached. But she loved music. When David was 7, she'd taken him to a free concert in the park. They sat on a blanket and ate sandwiches while a pianist played on a small stage. David had been mesmerized. The way the music swelled and dipped, the way it could sound like sadness or joy or something in between that didn't have a name. "You like that?" his grandmother had asked. David had nodded, unable to look away from the pianist's hands. "Then someday you'll play too," she'd said, as if it was the simplest thing in the world. When she died, she left him $700. It was everything she had. David had used $200 for her funeral. The rest he'd spent on a keyboard and a dream that felt more impossible every day. He started playing, his fingers moving through scales to warm up. The room might have been small and cold, the piano might have been out of tune, but the music was still there. It was still inside him, waiting to come out, above him. He could hear footsteps, voices, more music, always more music, reminding him of the world he was trying to enter. David played until his fingers felt loose and ready. He played until the doubt in his chest felt a little smaller. He played because it was the only thing he knew how to do when the world felt too big and too unwelcoming. In a few hours, he'd have to go upstairs. He'd have to sit at a piano in front of judges and an audience. He'd have to prove he belonged here, but for now, in this small room in the basement, with an out-of-tune piano and a suit that didn't quite fit, David played. And for a few minutes, that was enough. David sat in the back row of the auditorium watching the other competitors perform. Group 1 had started at 9, and he'd come up from the practice room to see what he was up against. Now sitting in the dim light with his number still pinned to his jacket, he wondered if coming here had been a huge mistake. The girl on stage was maybe 20 years old. She wore a silver dress that caught the stage lights as she moved. Her hands flew across the keys, playing something by Liszt that sounded impossibly difficult. Every note was perfect. Every phrase was exactly where it should be. When she finished, the audience clapped loudly, and the judges wrote notes on their papers with serious faces. "She's been training since she was 4, someone whispered in the row ahead. "Private lessons with Chen Wei. You know, the guy who studied under Barenboim." David had no idea who Barenboim was. He wrote the name on his program to look up later. Another competitor took the stage. This one was a young man in an expensive-looking suit, probably around David's age. He sat down at the piano with the kind of confidence that comes from never doubting yourself. Before he played, he adjusted the bench with precise movements like he'd done this 1,000 times before. The music started. Rachmaninoff. David recognized it from one of the videos he'd watched online. The piece was heavy and dramatic, full of crushing chords and runs that seemed to cover the entire keyboard. The guy played it like he was angry at the piano, attacking each phrase with power and precision. When he finished, people actually cheered. Not just polite applause, but real enthusiasm. The guy stood up and bowed, not too much, just enough to show he expected the praise. David's hands felt cold. That was the level he was competing against. These weren't people who learned piano in their free time. These were people who'd spent their whole lives preparing for this. Group 1 ended, and there was a break. People stood up, stretching and talking. David stayed in his seat, clutching his folder. He felt like if he moved, someone might ask him what he was doing here, and he wasn't sure he had a good answer anymore. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" David looked up. A guy around his age stood in the aisle holding a bottle of water. He had dark circles under his eyes and his tie was slightly crooked. "No, go ahead," David said. The guy sat down heavily and let out a long breath. "Man, I'm so nervous I think I might throw up." "You competing?" "Yeah, Group 3. Me too. I'm number 51. He stuck out his hand. "I'm Raymond." David shook his hand. "David, number 47. First time at one of these?" Raymond asked. "That obvious?" Raymond laughed, but it wasn't mean. "Only because you look as scared as I feel. I did one competition last year and completely bombed it. Forgot a whole section of my piece. Just sat there with my hands frozen on the keys like an idiot." But you came back, David said. Yeah, well, stupid dreams, you know. Raymond smiled, but there was something sad in it. My parents think I should give up and go to business school. They're probably right, but I can't stop thinking about music. It's like this thing inside me that won't shut up. David nodded. He knew exactly what Raymond meant. They sat together through Group 2, watching more incredible performances. A woman played Debussy so beautifully that David felt something catch in his throat. A teenage kid, couldn't have been more than 16, played something modern and complex that David didn't recognize but could tell was impressive. Where'd you study? Raymond asked during a quiet moment. David hesitated. This was the question he'd been dreading. I taught myself. Mostly from videos and books. He waited for Raymond to laugh or make some comment. But Raymond just nodded slowly. That's actually kinda cool. My teacher has me doing the same exercises over and over. Sometimes I feel like I'm just a machine playing notes instead of actually making music. Before David could respond, a voice came through the speakers. Group 3 will begin in 15 minutes. All Group 3 competitors, please report to the staging area. David's stomach dropped. This was it. They walked together to the staging area, a room behind the auditorium where competitors waited before going on. About 20 people were already there, sitting in chairs or pacing nervously. The energy in the room was thick with anxiety and competition. David found a chair in the corner and sat down. His hands were shaking slightly. He put them on his knees and tried to breathe slowly, like he'd read in an article about managing stress. Well, they really let anyone enter these days. David looked up. A tall guy stood in front of him, arms crossed. He had perfectly styled hair and a suit that looked like it came from a fashion magazine. His name tag read number 39, sorry, David said. I'm just saying this used to be a competition for serious musicians. Now it's like community theater. Anybody can sign up. The guy looked at David's worn folder at his slightly too big suit. Let me guess. You play in a church basement? Maybe some bar on weekends? Heat rushed to David's face. I work as a delivery driver. The guy laughed. Actually laughed out loud. A delivery driver. That's perfect. Hey everyone, we've got a delivery driver here. Maybe he can bring us some pizza after we're done. A few people nearby turned to look. Some looked uncomfortable. Others smirked. Leave him alone, Wesley, someone said. It was a woman sitting across the room. She looked older, maybe in her 30s. Wesley, number 39, held up his hands in mock surrender, just making conversation. No offense intended, but his smile said otherwise. He turned to the people near him. I'm just saying this is a serious competition. Some of us have been training our entire lives. We've studied at Juilliard, at Curtis, at the best conservatories in the world. And then someone walks in who learned from YouTube videos and thinks they belong on the same stage. He didn't say David's name, but everyone knew who he meant. David felt something twist inside him. It was anger mixed with shame, mixed with a voice that said maybe Wesley was right. Maybe David was fooling himself. Maybe he was wasting everyone's time, including his own. Where did you study? Wesley asked, looking directly at David now. I told you. I didn't. Right, self-taught. And what are you playing today? Let me guess. Some simple piece you think sounds impressive? Maybe a bit of Moonlight Sonata? David's jaw tightened. I wrote it myself. The room got quiet. Wesley's smile faded slightly, then came back even bigger. You wrote it. Your own composition. In a classical piano competition. He turned to the others. This is going to be entertaining. Number 39, you're up next, a stage manager called from the doorway. Wesley straightened his jacket. Watch and learn, he said, looking at David. This is what real training looks like. He walked toward the stage with the confidence of someone who'd never failed at anything in his life. The room slowly returned to normal conversation, but David felt everyone's eyes on him. Or maybe he just felt exposed. Like Wesley had ripped away some protective layer and now everyone could see the truth. He was an outsider. He didn't belong here. Raymond leaned over from his seat. Don't listen to that guy. He's just scared. Of what? David asked. Of people like you. People who play because they love it, not because their parents forced them into lessons when they were 5. Raymond smiled. I heard Wesley's dad is some famous conductor. Can you imagine the pressure? David nodded, but the words felt empty. In a few minutes, he'd have to walk onto that stage. He'd have to sit at that piano in front of judges who'd heard perfect performances all day. And he'd have to play something he wrote himself, something that came from his head and his heart, something that might be completely wrong for this kind of competition. His number was 47. They were on 39 now. Only 8 people between him and the moment that would prove whether he belonged here or whether Wesley was right. David closed his eyes and tried to hear his grandmother's voice. Tried to remember why he started playing in the first place. It wasn't for competitions or judges or people like Wesley. It was because music was the only thing that made sense when nothing else did. But sitting in that room, with Wesley's words still echoing and his hands still shaking, David wasn't sure anymore if that was enough. Wesley came back from his performance looking pleased with himself. He didn't say anything to David, but the satisfied smile on his face said enough. The applause had been loud. The judges had nodded approvingly. He'd done exactly what he came here to do. David watched 3 more people perform. Number 40, number 42, number 45. Each one was good. Really good. His heart hammered in his chest and he could feel sweat forming on his palms despite the cool air conditioning. Number 47. David Park, you're next. The stage manager stood in the doorway, clipboard in hand. This was it. David stood up and his legs felt weak. He grabbed his folder and walked toward the door. As he passed Raymond, his new friend gave him a thumbs up. "You've got this," Raymond whispered. David nodded but couldn't find words. His throat felt tight. The walk from the staging area to the stage was short, maybe 30 steps, but it felt like miles. He could hear murmuring from the audience as he emerged from the wings. The stage was huge, much bigger than it looked from the seats. In the center sat a beautiful grand piano, black and glossy under the bright lights. Beyond the piano, in the dim auditorium, he could see faces. Hundreds of them. Some looked curious. Some looked bored. Some were checking their phones. The 3 judges sat at a long table in the front row. The woman in the middle had gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore glasses and had the kind of face that seemed like it didn't smile often. The 2 men on either side looked equally serious. David walked to the piano. Each step echoed in the quiet hall. He sat down on the bench and adjusted it slightly. The keys gleamed in front of him, perfect and untouched. He set his folder on the piano's music stand even though he didn't need it. He'd memorized every note of his piece months ago. "Whenever you're ready," the woman judge said. Her voice was neutral, professional, giving nothing away. David placed his hands on the keys. They were cool and smooth. He took a breath, and in that moment every doubt came rushing back. What was he doing here? These people had spent their whole lives training. They'd had teachers and mentors and years of expensive lessons. He'd learned from free videos and library books. Wesley was right. He didn't belong here. His hands trembled slightly over the keys. Then, somewhere in his mind, he heard it. His grandmother's voice. Not words exactly, but the sound of her humming while she folded laundry in their small apartment. Those old Korean melodies she'd known by heart. The way she'd hum them while cooking, while cleaning, while just existing in the world. She hadn't been trained. She hadn't gone to music school. She just loved music because it made life feel less heavy. David pressed down on the first key. The note rang out, soft and clear. Then another. And another. He'd written this piece over 6 months, working on it late at night after his delivery shifts. It wasn't like the classical pieces everyone else had played. It started quiet, almost like a question. The melody was simple at first, just a few notes that repeated, but each time they came back, they were slightly different. He forgot about the judges. He forgot about Wesley and his cruel smile. He forgot about the audience and their judging eyes. His left hand began adding bass notes, deep and steady like a heartbeat. The piece started to grow. The melody wove in and out, sometimes clear, sometimes hiding beneath other sounds. He'd built in parts that reminded him of his grandmother's humming, little phrases that echoed those old songs she'd sung. Then the music shifted. His right hand climbed higher on the keyboard while his left and played a rhythm that was almost jazzy. This was the part he'd been most nervous about. It wasn't strictly classical. It broke the rules, but it was honest. It was what he heard in his head. The rhythm got stronger. His fingers moved faster. He added runs that cascaded down the keyboard like water. He'd learned this technique from a video by some pianist in Germany who'd posted free lessons online. It had taken him 2 weeks to get it right, practicing the same measure over and over in his apartment until his neighbor banged on the wall. The piece built to something bigger. Both hands were moving now, filling the hall with sound. It was loud but not harsh. It was powerful but not angry. It was everything he felt about life, about struggle, about working 12-hour shifts and coming home to a dark apartment and still believing that tomorrow might be better. He could feel it now, really feel it. The music wasn't just notes anymore. It was alive. It was breathing. His body swayed slightly as he played, unconsciously moving with the phrases. His eyes were closed and he was somewhere else, somewhere where there were no judges or competitions or people telling him he didn't belong. The melody came back, transformed. What had been a simple question at the beginning was now an answer. The notes were the same, but they meant something different now. They were stronger, more certain. He added an improvised section, something he hadn't planned. His fingers found notes that fit, that made sense in the moment. He let the music guide him instead of trying to control it. This was the thing he'd learned from jazz videos, the idea that sometimes you had to trust your hands and your heart instead of overthinking. The audience had gone completely silent. In the dim light beyond the stage, people had stopped moving. Phone screens had gone dark. Even the judges had stopped writing and were just listening. David didn't notice. He was too far inside the music. The piece climbed to its highest point. Both hands were in the upper register of the piano, creating something that sounded almost like bells. Then it began to descend slowly, gently. The volume dropped. The intensity softened. The melody returned one last time, quiet now, like a memory. His left hand played a simple pattern. His right hand added single notes, each one careful and deliberate. The piece was ending the way it began, with that question, but now the question felt different. It wasn't filled with doubt anymore. It was filled with acceptance. The final chord was soft. He held it, letting it ring out until it faded to nothing. His foot stayed on the sustain pedal, letting the last vibrations die naturally. Then silence. David opened his eyes. For a moment he couldn't remember where he was. He blinked in the bright stage lights, his hands still resting on the keys. Then the sound hit him. Applause. But not the polite, obligatory clapping he'd heard for other performers. This was different. It started with one person, then spread like a wave through the audience. People were actually clapping hard, enthusiastically. Some were even standing up. David looked out at the audience, confused. He saw Raymond in the staging area doorway, clapping with a huge smile on his face. He saw the woman who'd told Wesley to leave him alone, nodding with approval. He even saw Wesley standing in the back, clapping slowly, though his face looked like he'd tasted something sour. The judges were writing frantically on their papers. The woman in the middle, the one with the gray hair, looked up at him. Her stern face had changed. There was something in her eyes that might have been surprise, or maybe respect. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying across the quiet that followed the applause. "That was unexpected. Can you tell us about your training background?" David stood up from the bench, his legs unsteady. He walked to the front of the stage. "I'm self-taught," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I learned from videos and books. I've been playing for about 4 years. One of the male judges leaned forward. "And the piece you just performed? That was original?" "Yes, sir. I wrote it over the past 6 months." The judges looked at each other. They didn't say anything, but something passed between them. Some unspoken communication. The incorporation of jazz elements with classical structure was quite innovative, the woman said. "We don't often see that kind of creative risk in these competitions." David didn't know what to say. "Thank you" seemed too small. "You may go," she said, but not unkindly. "Results will be posted in 1 hour." David walked off stage on shaking legs. The moment he stepped into the wings, his knees almost gave out. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. Whether he advanced or not, whether the judges liked it or not, he'd played his music, his own music. And for those few minutes, he'd felt what his grandmother must have felt when she hummed those old songs. He'd felt free. David found a quiet corner in the hallway outside the auditorium and sat down on the floor, his back against the wall. His heart was still racing. His hands were still shaking. He could barely process what had just happened. People walked past him, some glancing down with curiosity. He didn't care. He needed a moment to just breathe and let the adrenaline fade. That was incredible. David looked up. Raymond stood there, still smiling that huge smile. "I'm serious, man. I've been to a lot of these competitions and I've never heard anything like that. The whole room was hypnotized. I don't know what happened up there, David said honestly. I just started playing and everything else disappeared. That's what it's supposed to feel like, Raymond said, sliding down to sit beside him. That's the part they can't teach in all those expensive schools. The feeling. They sat in silence for a moment. Down the hall, they could hear the muffled sound of another performance starting. I should probably find a place to warm up before my turn, Raymond said, standing up. But seriously, David, whatever happens with the results, you did something real up there. Don't forget that. David nodded, grateful for the kindness. Raymond disappeared down the hallway, and David was alone again with his thoughts. He checked his phone. He had 7 missed calls from work. Right. He'd called in sick today, told his supervisor he had a family emergency. It was the first sick day he'd taken in 8 months. His boss probably wasn't happy, but David couldn't think about that now. Excuse me? A woman stood in front of him. She was maybe 50, with kind eyes and a professional-looking outfit. She held a small notebook. I'm sorry to bother you, she said, but I'm Catherine Mills. I write for the City Arts Journal. I was in the audience for your performance. David scrambled to his feet, suddenly aware that he'd been sitting on the floor. Oh, hi. I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions. Your performance was remarkable, and I think our readers would love to hear your story. David's mind went blank. My story? Yes, how you learned to play, what inspired that piece, your background. I try to cover all the major competitions, and I've been doing this for 15 years. I can tell you that what you did up there was special. Different. They found a bench near a window, and Catherine pulled out her notebook. David told her everything, the words spilling out easier than he expected. He told her about his grandmother, about the keyboard he bought used, about learning from videos at midnight after long shifts. He told her about the comments he'd gotten when he arrived, about Wesley's words in the staging area. Catherine wrote quickly, occasionally asking questions. And the piece itself? Where did that come from? David thought for a moment. I wanted to capture what it feels like to be between places. Like you're not where you used to be, but you're not where you're going yet either. That in-between space where everything feels uncertain but also full of possibility? Catherine smiled. That's beautiful. Can I quote you on that? Sure, I guess. They talked for another 10 minutes. Catherine asked about his plans, whether he wanted to pursue music professionally. David admitted he didn't know. Music was everything to him, but he also had rent to pay and bills to cover. Reality didn't care about dreams. Well, Catherine said, closing her notebook, I think you'll find that after today some doors might open. That performance will get people talking. After she left, David wandered back toward the auditorium. The hour wasn't up yet, but he couldn't sit still anymore. He found Raymond in the hallway looking pale. How'd it go? David asked. Raymond shook his head. I messed up the middle section. Not terrible, but not great either. I'll be lucky if I make it through. He forced a smile. But hey, at least one of us killed it. The announcement came over the speakers. Preliminary round results are now posted in the main lobby. All competitors, please check the board for your status. A flood of people moved toward the lobby. David felt his stomach drop again. This was it. Either he'd advanced to the finals or his day was over. The crowd around the results board was thick. People pushed and jostled, some celebrating, others walking away with disappointed faces. David hung back, suddenly afraid to look. Park! Someone shouted. David Park! He turned. A guy he didn't recognize was waving at him from near the board. You're on the finals list, man. You made it! David's ears started ringing. He pushed through the crowd to see for himself. The board listed 20 names. He scanned down, his eyes jumping over the letters, and there it was. Number 47. David Park, advanced to finals. Congratulations. Wesley stood beside him, arms crossed. His name was on the list too, number 39. But his expression was complicated, like he couldn't decide if he was angry or impressed. Thanks, David said carefully. Look, Wesley said, his voice lower now, less performative. What I said earlier in the staging area. That was out of line. I was being a jerk. David wasn't sure how to respond. This version of Wesley seemed almost human. I've been doing competitions since I was 8 years old, Wesley continued, looking at the board instead of at David. My father was a conductor. My mother was a concert pianist. Music isn't something I chose. It's something I inherited. And when I saw you today, this guy who just showed up with no training, no pedigree, I guess I felt threatened." "Why?" David asked. Wesley finally looked at him. "Because you play like you have nothing to lose. You play with freedom. I've spent 18 years being trained to play perfectly, to hit every note exactly right, to follow every rule. But when you were up there, you weren't thinking about rules. You were just making music, and everyone could feel the difference." Before David could respond, someone tapped him on the shoulder. He turned to find the gray-haired judge from earlier, the stern woman who'd asked about his training. "Mr. Park, could you come with me for a moment?" David's heart jumped. Was something wrong? Did they discover he'd lied about something? But he hadn't lied about anything. He followed her to a quieter corner of the lobby. Up close, she was less intimidating than she'd seemed behind the judge's table. "I'm Dr. Helen Vance," she said, extending her hand. "I'm the director of the conservatory program at Westfield University." David shook her hand, confused about where this was going. "I've been teaching piano for 32 years, Dr. Vance continued, and in that time I've heard thousands of students. Most of them are technically proficient. They play the notes correctly. They understand theory, but very few of them understand what you demonstrated today." "What's that?" David asked. "That music is a language, not a test. It's about communication, not perfection." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "Your technique needs work. Your knowledge of classical repertoire probably has gaps, but you have something that can't be taught. You have a voice." David felt his throat tighten. "I'd like to offer you a full scholarship to our conservatory program," Dr. Vance said. "You'd study with me directly. We'd work on technique, theory, composition, but more importantly, we'd nurture what you already have. That raw, honest approach to music." David couldn't speak. "A scholarship. To study music. Actually study it. Not just steal moments between delivery routes." "You don't have to answer now," Dr. Vance said, pulling out a business card. "Think about it. Email me your decision, but I want you to know that what you did today matters. You reminded everyone in that hall why we fell in love with music in the first place." She walked away, leaving David standing there with a business card in his trembling hand. Raymond found him a few minutes later. "Dude, what did she want?" David told him. Raymond's face lit up. "That's amazing. Dr. Vance is legendary. People wait years to study with her." "I work as a delivery driver," David said, the reality sinking in. "I can't just quit and go to school." Why not?" Raymond asked. "When does an opportunity like this come around? Besides, scholarships usually include living expenses." David looked down at the card in his hand. The logo was embossed in gold. It felt heavy, like it carried the weight of a decision that could change everything. Around them, the lobby buzzed with energy. Competitors congratulated each other or consoled friends who didn't advance. Parents hugged their kids. Teachers gave advice. This was a world David had only glimpsed from the outside, and now someone was offering to let him in. His phone buzzed. Another message from work. He'd have to deal with that eventually. He'd have to figure out what came next, how to pay rent, whether taking a scholarship meant giving up the security of a steady paycheck. But right now, standing in that lobby with a business card in his hand and his name on the finals list, David let himself feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The finals were scheduled for 7 that evening. David had 5 hours to wait. 5 hours to let his nerves build or his confidence crumble. He decided to walk. Just walk and clear his head. The streets outside the music hall were busy with afternoon traffic. People rushed past with shopping bags and coffee cups, everyone moving to their own rhythm. None of them knew that inside that building, David's whole life might be changing. He found a small park 2 blocks away and sat on a bench. He pulled out his phone and stared at Dr. Vance's business card, then at the messages from work. His supervisor had stopped calling and started texting. "Need to talk. Call me ASAP." David knew what that conversation would be. He'd probably lost his job. Missing a shift with barely any notice wasn't something his boss would forgive easily. The steady paycheck, the health insurance, the simple security of knowing exactly what tomorrow looked like, all of it might be gone. But maybe that wasn't the worst thing. He typed out a text to his supervisor. "I know I messed up. I'll call you tomorrow to explain. I'm sorry." It wasn't much, but it was all he could manage right now. Then he called his mother. "David, why aren't you at work?" Her voice carried that edge of worry she always had. I'm at a piano competition, Mom. Silence on the other end. Then, a competition? You never told me about this. I didn't think I'd actually do well. But I made it to the finals. And Mom, a professor, offered me a scholarship. A full scholarship to study music at a real conservatory. More silence. David could picture her face. The way she'd be processing this information. Trying to decide if it was wonderful or worrying. That's amazing. Sweetheart, she finally said. And he could hear the emotion in her voice. Your grandmother would be so proud. I'm scared, David admitted. What if I'm making a huge mistake? What if I give up everything for this and I'm not good enough? David, you've been playing piano in that tiny apartment for 4 years. I've heard you through the walls, practicing the same parts over and over until 2 in the morning. That's not something people do unless it matters more than anything else. But the jobs come and go. But how often does someone offer you a chance to do what you love? Your grandmother worked in that dry cleaning shop for 30 years. She never got to do what she loved. Don't make the same choice she had to make. After they hung up, David sat with those words. The park was getting quieter as the afternoon wore on. A few kids played on the swings. An old man fed pigeons from a bag of breadcrumbs. Life continued, ordinary and simple. When he got back to the music hall, the energy had changed. The lobby was packed with people dressed in evening wear. The finals weren't just for competitors anymore. This was an event. News cameras were set up near the entrance. The local classical music station had a booth with announcers talking into microphones. Raymond found him near the entrance. There you are. I've been looking everywhere. They moved us to real dressing rooms. Can you believe it? Like we're actual performers. The dressing room had mirrors with lights around them, a couch and a small table with water bottles. David felt like he was in a dream. On the schedule posted outside, he saw his name. He'd be performing last, after everyone else had gone. After the audience was tired and the judges had heard everything, he'd be the final act. That's either really good or really bad, Raymond said, reading over his shoulder. Going last means they'll remember you. But it also means following some incredible performances. The finals had only 8 competitors, the best of the best. Wesley was third on the list. One by one, David watched them perform on a monitor in the dressing room. Each performance was stunning. A woman played Chopin with such delicate precision that it sounded like the piano was whispering. A young guy performed something modern and dissonant that somehow worked perfectly. Wesley played Rachmaninoff again, and he was flawless. Not a single mistake, not a moment of hesitation. When Wesley came back to the dressing room, he looked drained but satisfied. That's it, he said to no one in particular. That's the best I've ever played. Then it was Raymond's turn. David watched his friend walk to the stage, saw him sit at the piano, saw his hand shake slightly before the first note. Raymond played beautifully, a piece by Ravel that floated through the hall like water. When he finished, the applause was warm and genuine. Number 47, David Park, you're up. The walk to the stage felt different this time, maybe because he'd done it once before. Maybe because he had nothing left to lose. The lobby had been empty during preliminaries. Now it was packed. Every seat was filled. People stood along the back wall. The news cameras were running. David walked onto the stage and the applause was polite, expectant. He sat at the piano and looked out at the sea of faces. In the front row, Dr. Vance sat with the other judges. A few rows back, he spotted Catherine Mills, the journalist, her notebook ready. Raymond gave him a small wave from the side section. David placed his hands on the keys. But before he started, he did something he hadn't planned. He spoke. I'd like to dedicate this performance to my grandmother, he said, his voice carrying through the hall thanks to the microphone above the piano. She worked her whole life at a job she didn't love, so that I could have opportunities she never had. This piece is called Between Here and There, and it's for her. The hall went quiet. David took a breath, and he began to play. This time was different from the preliminaries. This time he knew what to expect. He knew the weight of the silence, the pressure of the lights, the feeling of hundreds of eyes watching. But he also knew what it felt like to lose himself in the music, to let everything else fall away. The piece started the same way it had before, with that simple question. But as he played, David made different choices. He let some phrases breathe longer. He added emphasis in places he hadn't before. The music was the same, but it was also new, shaped by everything that had happened since that morning. When he reached the jazz section, he pushed even further than before. His fingers found rhythms that surprised even him. He could feel the audience leaning in, following every unexpected turn. This wasn't what they'd heard all evening. This wasn't safe or traditional or what competitions usually rewarded, but it was honest. The melody transformed as it climbed, building to something bigger than before. David thought about his grandmother humming in their kitchen. He thought about 4 years of practicing on a cheap keyboard after exhausting work shifts. He thought about every person who'd made him feel like he didn't belong, and every person who'd shown him kindness when he needed it most. All of it poured into the music. Then, in a moment of pure instinct, David improvised an entire new section. His hands moved to a part of the keyboard he hadn't planned to use, creating a bridge between the piece's climax and its ending. It was risky. It was spontaneous. It could have been a disaster, but it was perfect. The audience recognized what was happening. He heard someone gasp. This wasn't a prepared performance anymore. This was creation happening in real time. David brought the piece back to its theme, but now it had been through everything. The question from the beginning had become an answer. The uncertainty had become acceptance. Not resolution exactly, but understanding. The final notes fell like leaves, gentle and inevitable. David held the last chord until it disappeared into silence. For a moment, nothing happened. The hall was completely still. Then the sound started. Applause, yes, but different from before. People weren't just clapping. They were standing. The whole audience rising to their feet. The applause grew louder, joined by cheering. Someone actually whooped. David stood and bowed, overwhelmed. He looked at Dr. Vance, who was standing with the others, clapping with tears in her eyes. He saw Raymond jumping up and down. He saw Wesley standing too, clapping slowly but genuinely, a smile on his face that looked almost relieved, like David's success somehow freed him from something. The judges conferred for only 10 minutes, shorter than anyone expected. When they returned, Dr. Vance took the microphone. "Tonight we heard 8 extraordinary performances," she said. "Each one demonstrated technical mastery and deep musical understanding. Our first-place winner showed flawless execution of one of the most demanding pieces in the classical repertoire." She paused. "Wesley Bradford for his interpretation of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. Wesley stood, accepting his medal and flowers, and the applause was generous and deserved. "However," Dr. Vance continued, "we also heard something tonight that reminded us why we dedicate our lives to music. We heard someone take a risk, someone who played not to impress but to express. For artistic innovation and emotional honesty, the special jury award goes to David Park." David walked on stage in a daze. Dr. Vance handed him a medal and a certificate, but more than that, she handed him an envelope. "This is confirmation of your scholarship," she whispered as they shook hands. "And something else. 3 venues have already asked if you'd perform. Paid performances. You're not just a student anymore. You're an artist." That night after the ceremony, after the photographs and the congratulations and the journalist questions, David stood outside the music hall alone. The street was quiet now. The crowds had gone home. Tomorrow he'd have difficult conversations. He'd have to figure out logistics and make real decisions. But tonight, he just stood there with a medal around his neck and a scholarship in his pocket, looking up at the stars, knowing that his grandmother was somewhere smiling. He'd walked into this building that morning as a delivery driver who played piano on the side. He was leaving as a musician with a future. Sometimes, the only thing standing between who you are and who you could be is the courage to play your own music, even when everyone expects you to play theirs. David pulled out his phone and looked at Dr. Vance's business card one more time. Then he typed an email. "Dear Dr. Vance, I accept your offer. When do I start?" He hit send and started walking home, already hearing new melodies in his head.